Hey there, welcome back to Mike Reads the World. And on this first official evening of summer of 2024, I would like to go back to the author that launched this entire channel, this entire Read Around the World project. The very first video I did was for the author Tove Jansson and her book The True Deceiver. But today I am covering what I think is one of the greatest books ever written, the Summer Book. And it's always been difficult for me to decide which is my favorite of hers, The True Deceiver or the Summer Book. It kind of depends on the season, because The True Deceiver might as well be called her winter book. It is very much in theme, and even the setting of the story placed in the depths of the Scandinavian winter. And here in the Summer Book, we have the yin to that yang, so to speak. Tove Jansson writes with a simultaneous clarity and profundity that I have found in no other author. And I can say that now after reading 87 countries, 110 videos on this channel, that all of what I'm saying I believed before doing all that, and I still believe now. The Summer Book is one of my favorite books of all time, and this video I am making as a love letter to the book. So if at any point in the video you want to experience it for yourself, I'm going to hold nothing back. I want to share my favorite moments, everything about it that I love, without any thought to spoilers. So here we go. The frame of the story, the setting, is almost absurdly simple. 6-year-old Sophia is on a Scandinavian island that her family owns with her grandmother and her father. Her mother has recently passed away, which is mentioned one time and never again, barely mentioned, and yet it is present throughout the entire story, in the conversations, the questions she asks her grandmother, their playing, her playing and discovering the island, her fears and hopes that emerge as this goes on. But it is simply, first and foremost, a slice of life of this, living on a Scandinavian island during a summer holiday. Nothing more and nothing less. Well, actually, I think there's a lot more to it. And I'm going to just start the very first chapter, A Morning Swim. Sophia and her grandmother are talking about her grandmother's false teeth. Sophia asks, when is she going to die? Her grandmother responds, soon, but that is not the least concern of yours. And then they talk about swimming and diving, and Sophia says, I can dive. Do you know what it feels like when you dive? Of course I do, her grandmother said. You let go of everything and get ready and just dive. You can feel the seaweed against your legs. It's brown and the water's clear, lighter toward the top, with lots of bubbles, and you glide. You hold your breath and glide and turn and come up. Just let yourself rise and breathe out, and then you float. Just float. And all the time with your eyes open, Sophia said. Naturally, people don't dive with their eyes shut. And we go on, and Sophia remembers in the next chapter a time in April when she laid in bed and watched during a full moon the ice drifting off into the water during the spring thaw. And then in the third chapter, The Magic Forest, she is scared when she sees an animal skull as her grandmother plays in the forest, carving animals into wooden branches. And these first 3 chapters set a few patterns that we see throughout the entire book, that in these patterns and these symbols, so much meaning and magic is produced. The first is that we have a young girl who is just beginning her life, and a woman who is nearing the close of her life. And the differences between child and adult kind of start to disappear, and yet the two have so much to teach and learn from each other, being at these two extremes, these two different places in life. And in that space between them, there's just an incredible amount of wisdom and beauty and life that emerges. The second thing is there is a symbol or a reference to mortality or death in nearly every chapter of this book, and many times it is thinly veiled. And sometimes it is more overt, but it is always there, even though the elephant in the room, I guess, the passing of Sophia's mother is only mentioned once. And I want to share a passage from the fourth chapter, the Scolder, that connected almost directly to the medieval Persian poem that I just covered on this channel, The Conference of the Birds. It's a very long video, so you don't have to watch it, obviously, but it's the birds are analogous to people, to different kinds of people, and I realized on this, probably my 6th or 7th read through of the summer book. I've lost count of how many times I've read this book at this point. I keep realizing new things. The birds mentioned in this passage are analogous to many of the characters that are going to come in and out of their lives on this island over this summer. Grandmother walked up over the bare granite and thought about birds in general. It seemed to her no other creature had the same dramatic capacity to underline and perfect events. The shifts in the seasons and the weather, the changes that run through people themselves. She thought about migratory birds and the thrush on the summer evening, and the cuckoo, yes, the cuckoo, and the great cold birds that sail and watch, and the very small birds that sweep in for the hasty visits and large late summer parties, chubby, dumb, and unafraid, and about the swallows that only honor houses where the people are happy. It seemed remarkable that the impersonal birds should not have become such powerful symbols, or maybe not. For grandmother, long-tailed ducks meant anticipation and renewal. She walked carefully across the rock on her stiff legs, and when she came to the little cottage, she knocked on the window. Sophia woke up at once and came outside. "I'm going to go listen to the long-tails," grandmother said. And then we continue into probably one of the most iconic chapters of the book for me, Berenice, which is when one of Sophia's friends, actually her first friend that has ever come to visit the island, comes to visit. A girl we kind of get a sense from the town or from the city, and she's, paranoid about ants crawling up her legs. She's really not having a good time on the island. She's crying. She feels extremely uncomfortable. And at one point, grandmother is looking at her and kind of pitying her and thinks, if only she were a little bigger, preferably a good deal bigger, so I could tell her that I understand how awful it is. Here you come, headlong into a tight little group of people who have always lived together, who have the habit of moving around each other on land they know and own and understand, and every threat to what they're used to only makes them still more compact and self-assured. An island can be dreadful for someone from outside. Everything is complete, and everyone has his obstinate, sure, and self-sufficient place. Within their shores, everything functions according to rituals that are as hard as rock from repetition, and at the same time they amble through their days as whimsically and casually as if the world ended at the horizon. And if you've ever gone to work at a small company where everyone knows each other, or you've gone on vacation to a place, or visited a friend in a rural area in the mountains or something in a small town, you know what this is like when you are in a place where everything is so complete in itself that you feel that you will never be anything but an outsider. And this is where, in this book, the concept of the island goes from being the literal place that they are to an archetype in my mind that I have seen and am seeing everywhere. How we are all creating our own little islands socially, which is kind of in a way that hasn't really existed in the past in history. But it is such a fruitful idea, and this is only one of many in this book that emerges from the interaction of Sophia and her grandmother, not just between themselves, but with their environments. They're living on this place that is so, they know so well, incomplete in themselves. And islands is going to be a theme in the next few videos, as well as we're going to be covering Polynesia and Easter Island next on this channel. So keep this analogy, this metaphor in mind, as it will be very important when we look at Easter Island as a microcosm of the earth itself. And so Berenice, terrified as she is, ends the chapter. At this point, Sophia and her grandmother are so annoyed with Berenice, they're practically ignoring her. And Berenice draws this terrifying picture. She hands it to grandmother, and it's described like this. Bernice's drawing was good. It had been done in a kind of painstaking fury, and depicted a creature with a black hole for a face. This creature was moving forward with its shoulders hunched. Its arms were long, scalloped wings like those on a bat. They began near its neck and dragged on the ground on either side, a prop or perhaps a hindrance for the vague, boneless body. It was such an awful and such an expressive picture that grandmother was filled with admiration. She opened the door and called, "It's good! It's a really good drawing!" She didn't look at the child, only at the drawing, and the tone of her voice was neither friendly nor encouraging. One of my favorite passages in the book. Like, this drawing is there's it's this window into some kind of like abyssal fear behind everything that's going on in the book. This book is 170 pages, fairly large text, but there is everything in it. Everything is in this book, I feel, when I read it. I feel such a sense of completeness, but I suppose maybe that is just the illusion of the island, where everything is complete in itself. So then the pasture. It's like every chapter you have to stop at. There's no wasted word in this book. They're talking about hell. "Now I've got you," Sophia cried. "Yesterday you said there wasn't any hell." Grandmother was annoyed and sat up angrily. "And I say exactly the same thing today," she said, "but this is just a game." "It's not a game. It's serious when you're talking about God." "He would never do anything so dumb as make a hell," says Grandma. "Of course he did." "No, he didn't." "Yes, he did. A big, enormous hell." Because she was mad, Grandmother stood up much too quickly, and the whole pasture started spinning around, and she almost lost her balance. She waited for the giddiness to stop. "Sophia," she said, "this is really not something to argue about. You can see for yourself that life is hard enough without being punished for it afterwards. We get comfort when we die. That's the whole idea." And they carry on this way a little bit, and then Grandmother says, "My dear child," she said, "with the best will in the world, I cannot start believing in the devil at my age. You can believe what you like, but you must learn to be tolerant." "What does that mean?" asked the child sullenly. "That means respecting other people's convictions." "What are convictions?" Sophia screamed. "No, what are convictions?" Sophia screamed and stamped her foot. "Letting others believe what they want to believe," her grandmother shouted back. "I'll let you believe in God. I'll let you believe God damns people, and you let me not." "You swore," Sophia whispered. "I certainly did not." "You did too. You said God damns." They were no longer looking at each other. And then Grandmother sings a poem about cow shit, and Sophia is horrified and then starts singing along. It's a wonderful book, and maybe, I don't know if you listen to that and think there's nothing deep in that conversation. I find a whole world of meaning in that conversation that I'm not even going to get into because I feel like this video is already going to be long enough. They play Venice, and Grandmother once again gets even more into the playing than Sophia does. This is Again, I mentioned another theme that emerges, that the differences between the very old person and the very young person kind of start to blur. Sophia, many times in this book, is far more serious than her grandmother, and her grandmother is far more playful and mischievous than Sophia. And there's something wonderfully true about that dynamic. It's wonderful. It's wonderful. It's wonderful. It's wonderful. The There's so much I want to talk about in this book. The cat. Sophia gets a cat. She loves it so much, but it won't love her back. It starts killing birds. She hates it. She trades it away. This cat, Moppy. And she gets a cat that's lazy, lays around all the time, but doesn't actually hunt or kill birds. And she wants her old cat back that she both loves and hates and makes her miserable. And the chapter ends, "What's wrong now? I want Moppy back." "But you know how it'll be," grandmother said. "It'll be awful," said Sophia gravely, "but it's Moppy I love." Lessons about the way that the first discovery of love or attachment to somebody can be extraordinarily painful, and sometimes it is, as we go on in life, continues to be very painful. I don't know that love in any sense is not a little bit painful. So let's continue. There is, again, just so much. What probably, if I had to pick one chapter that's like a favorite, I don't want to call it my favorite, but it's the one that every time I get to it in this book, and it's exactly halfway through the book, and it's called Midsummer, halfway through the book, and it's about a friend, a family friend who never came too close, and that was Erikson. The family had one friend who never came too close, and that was Erikson. This chapter is the one that I always get a thrill when I get to it, and it's mysterious and adventurous, and I love it. Erikson would drive by in his boat, or he would think about coming but never get around to it. There were even summers when Erikson came nowhere near the island and didn't think about it either. Erikson was small and strong in the color of the landscape, except that his eyes were blue. When people talked about him or thought about him, it seemed natural to lift their heads and gaze out over the sea. He was often unlucky and was plagued by bad weather and engine trouble. His herring nets would rip or get caught in his propeller, and fish and fowl would fail to turn up where he had expected them. And if he did have a good catch, the price would go down, so it was always 6 of one or half a dozen of the other. But beyond all these routine troubles that can spoil a person's livelihood, there were other unexpected possibilities. The family had long realized, without ever discussing it, that Erikson didn't especially like fishing and hunting and motorboats. What he did like was harder to put your finger on, but perfectly understandable. His attention and his sudden wishes raced here and there across the water like ocean breezes, and he lived in a perpetual state of quiet excitement. The sea is always subject to unusual events. Things drift in or run aground or shift in the night when the wind changes, and keeping track of all this takes experience, imagination, and unflagging watchfulness. It takes a good nose, to put it simply. The big events always take place far out in the skerries, and time is often of the essence. Only small things happen in among the islands, but these too, the odd jobs that arise from the whims of the summer people, have to be dealt with. One of them wants a ship's mast mounted on his roof, and another one needs a rock weighing half a ton, and it has to be round. A person can find anything if he takes the time, that is, if he can afford to look, and while he's looking, he's free, and he finds things he never expected. Sometimes people are very predictable. They want a kitten in June, for example, and come the 1st of September, they want someone to drown their cat, so someone does. But other times, people have dreams, and they want things they can keep. Erikson was the man who fulfilled these dreams. No one knew exactly what he found for himself along the way, probably a lot less than people thought. but he went on doing it anyway, perhaps for the sake of the search. One of the mysterious and attractive things about Erikson was that he didn't talk about himself. He never seemed to feel the urge, nor did he talk about other people. They didn't interest him very much. His infrequent visits might occur at any time of the day or night, and they never lasted long. Depending on when he arrived, he might have a cup of coffee, or a meal, or even take a drink just to be polite, but then he would turn quiet and uneasy. He would start listening, and then he would leave. But as long as he stayed, he had everyone's undivided attention. No one did anything. No one looked at anything but Erikson. They would hang on his every word, and he was gone, and nothing had actually been said. Their thoughts would dwell gravely on what he had left unspoken. Are we describing a god of the sea here? No. Tove Jansson in Erikson has created a beautiful archetype of a person that is, to me, absolutely real, an ideal that I am very far from, but an ideal that is absolutely achievable. Erikson may be my favorite character in the entirety of literature, and he is in one chapter of one rather short book. And he takes this family on an adventure that is absolutely bewildering. Basically a salvage trip. He takes the family out to go salvaging during the midsummer festivities. He gives them an adventure, a piece of life that they can keep. Nothing. The material that they gain from the salvage is completely beside the point, and I obviously won't read the entire chapter, but I just read a pretty fair chunk of it. Erikson is a character. If you ask me who's your favorite character in literature, he's the first one that I think of. And then we go on to the tent. Here the book starts to take on a few more melancholy tones. And after this chapter about a person who seems like something more than a person, and yet there is nothing supernatural about him except the way he makes people feel, that is all. Sophia has a conversation with her grandmother about sleeping in a tent. And her grandmother starts to get sad. They're sleeping in a tent, and she's thinking about how when she was younger, she says it like this: "In my country, in Sweden, girls had never been allowed to sleep in tents before," she said slowly. "I was the one who made it so they could, and it wasn't easy. We had a wonderful time, and now I can't even tell you what it was like." In this chapter, she says multiple times she feels things drifting away. Drifting away. What can you keep? Juxtaposed with the Midsummer chapter, it's very affecting, and this is a chapter that always kind of brings a tear. Her grandmother just saying she feels cheated. What was it all for? What were all these experiences in life for, when at the end of it, it's all slipping away? It's quite a melancholy chapter that I'm not doing justice by my explanations right now. But if you've read it, I think you know what I'm talking about. There's another one of my favorite chapters is The Neighbor, where grandmother mischievously, when they see that somebody has moved in on a nearby island, they go out to investigate. This person has gone out, and they've put a lock on on their door, and so grandmother says, that's not done, we have to go and investigate. If you put a lock on your door, you're asking for people to start nosing in your business. That's not how it's done here. So she actually leads Sophia to break into this person's house, basically, and the person shows up and says, oh, hey, yeah, I'm your new neighbor. He's very friendly about it all, even though they're like scared and suspicious. And then grandmother says, okay, we're going to have to socialize. She realizes that she needs to teach Sophia. I think I might be saying Sophie accidentally at multiple points of this video, but forget it. She realizes Sophia needs to like learn to socialize, so it's like, okay, we're going to socialize now. And I find the chapter so charming. The way I'm describing this must just be so mundane, but again, like if you've read this book, you understand the magic of these moments. And grandmother gets again a bit sad when they leave, because this person is from the city. Like a wealthy person basically buys their property on an island, and he's talking to grandmother about like how, yeah, living in tune with nature is the best, and he admires her because her family has lived there for 47 years. And or owned the island for 47 years, and he's like, oh wow, yeah, looks up to her, and he wants to connect with her about their connection to nature, and this connection to nature that he wants to find. And she just gets sad. She gives him some advice about building a dock, and she says to Sophia as they're leaving, my dear child, every human being has to make his own mistakes. She was very tired and wanted to get home. The visit had made her sad, somehow. Melander had an idea and was trying to work it out. But it would take him time. Sometimes people never saw things clearly until it was too late, and they no longer had the strength to start again. Or else they forgot their idea along the way and didn't even realize they had forgotten. As grandmother rode home, she gazed at the big house, interrupting the horizon, and it seemed to her it looked like a channel marker. If you squinted and thought about something else, it might almost be a channel marker, an objective indicator that here was a change of course. Every time there was a storm, they thought about Melander and tried to figure out different ways to save his boat. He never returned their visit, and so his house became an always fascinating landmark to consider and reflect upon. And I think he is one of those birds that is symbolized in the early chapter. I've read this book so many times and been so astounded at how many new things I find. I'm convinced that every line in this book connects to somewhere else, and that every single word of it has meaning. The robe is a great chapter too. I've got to move a little quicker, I think. The robe that Sophia's father never washes even once, the smelly robe, and that there's some superstition attached to. There's a chapter where Sophia's writing a story about angleworms and how they split, which is incredibly symbolic and metaphoric, where it's about loss, and it's really about the relationship between Sophia and her grandmother. And at this point, Sophia is really becoming aware that her grandmother really is reaching the end. And she's trying to come to terms not only with the passing of her mother, but the realization that her grandmother also soon, she's going to lose her grandmother as well. And there's many times when her father goes away or disappears in this book, and there's a sort of hinted at concern for her father's well-being. Sophia is struggling with the eternal question of meaning and loss of loved ones in this book. And everything, every symbol, everything in this book is a very thin veil that covers the surface of that deeper reality that's happening. And she says here, Small animals are a great problem. I wish God had never created small animals, or else that he had made them so they could talk, or else that he'd given them better faces. Space. Take moths. They fly at the lamp and burn themselves, and they fly right back again. It can't be instinct, because that isn't the way it works. They just don't understand, so they go right on doing it. Then they lie on their backs and all their legs quiver, and then they're dead. Did you get all that? Does it sound good? She's dictating this, and her grandmother's writing it down as part of her story or report on angleworms that have come apart. And then Sophia's storm. Sophia prays for something to happen. There is a storm, and her father doesn't come home, and she is racked with guilt that it's she, by her prayers for something to happen, caused God to make this storm, and then now her father is in danger. And there are conversations about this, and just by these simple questions about that she asks of her grandmother, like, is this my fault? Did I cause this storm? The simple questioning of, are my prayers heard? Is there anyone out there listening? The space between her and her grandmother and the unanswered questions. Again, it's just like Erikson. It's the things that are not said in these final chapters that are the most impactful. And of course, I always cry at the end of this book. Every single time, the final chapter where the fading, the drifting away. There were symbols of things drifting away throughout the book, but the drifting away of the grandmother's thoughts and consciousness in the final chapter, August, is crushing and elevating at the same time. Isn't that funny? Grandmother said. It's only my heart. It's not a herring boat at all. For a long time she wondered if she should go back to bed or stay where she was. She guessed she would stay for a while. And the book ends with the slow thumping that passes the island farther and farther away, but never stopping. It's never, fall is coming. It's never explicitly stated that grandmother passes away here, but it is, the symbolism around it all implies it, and it's crushing every single time. It's crushing, and but also everything that's happened in this book, the mundane things happening on this island, the life that Sophia not only probably has ahead of her, but also the life that she's already experienced, these in the moment, these beautiful moments that are experienced throughout the book are what make it. And I'm just going on and on. This whole video is just love letter to the book. I wanted it to be as little scripted as possible, and yeah, thanks for watching if you've got to the end of it, and take care, be well, and I don't know, I think it's funny to come to this book halfway through the countries that I plan to read, when it's the author that launched this, and still find it to be a book that moves me in a way that no other has. I mean, there's books that I would place alongside it as my favorite books of all time, but this one still stands as utterly unique in the amount of times that I've reread it and explored it fully, and I'm glad that I saved this one for later on to talk about, and that The True Deceiver was the first video. And I think I'm also, when and if I make it to the end of reading a book from every country in the world, that Tove Jansson will also be the final, a book by her will also be the final book that I cover, although I don't think that anything, well, I could be wrong. I haven't actually read any of her other books besides the summer book and The True Deceiver, which I love equally, but it'll be interesting. I think I'll end the project with one of her books that I haven't read yet, and we'll see. Thank you, and take care.